Hey there, I'm Parker Rex. I led product and technology for a startup that did $73 million dollars at its peak, $47 million dollars after we got hammered by VC competitors, and sold for $23 million dollars. That's for another time, that story. But on this channel, I talk about all the things that I'm doing now to grow an AI services business to $100,000 in profit a month. And we do this every single day. So I take in questions, I go through the strategy, I go through some news that's only relevant if it's helpful for people that are trying to do something like me, because there is like way too much AI news. It's literally just garbage, most of it, because it's media companies that want to get clicks and sell ads. And I'm not either of those. So let's jump in. First, we're going to cover some questions that came in, and they're really good ones. And they're not necessarily from YouTube, actually. They're just questions that I got yesterday from people that I talked on the phone with. I don't even know if we have a question on here, but I'm just going to check. But while I check, I just got great content. Hey, thanks. Thanks, Marilyn. Thanks. Cool. So the question that came in that I wanted to talk about is actually, what are the vibe coding pitfalls? So I had a friend ask, why wouldn't you just talk to the computer? And if you've watched my videos before, you know that I feel strongly about this, that the guy who coined vibe code is the Michael Jordan of AI. So you're not him. You're not that guy, pal. But there are ways to make the most out of the situation. When I was learning and taking coding seriously, it was right when the first versions of GPT 3.5 were coming out. And I used it as a 24/7 tutor just to ask a bunch of questions, because typically people don't ask questions because they feel like they're going to sound dumb or something. But that's dumb. You shouldn't feel that way. But what's beautiful is that you don't have to worry about that. You can just ask a million questions. So instead of vibe coding and getting yourself into a mess, just have one half of the screen be the thing you're working on, and then one half be an AI, and pick a tool set and stick to it. Don't swap around. I probably wasted a lot of time just getting shiny object syndrome. And there's a couple stacks that you should use that are really well trained on, like, by the LLMs. So what I would use is, I'd use Supabase. What that is, if you're not familiar, it is the green lightning bolt. Now, what they have is they have a database, so giant spreadsheet basically, and that's using a technology called Postgres. And you'll see at the end it has SQL. SQL is its own language, super powerful. Postgres is in a different version of SQL. It's got a lot more to it. Some of the basics that you can do is, in the database itself, you can have what's called a trigger. So every time that a new user signs up to my service, we can have a trigger that automatically goes off that does something. We could say we want to, when they're authenticated with Google, we want to set up a trigger that emails them. If they're authenticated with GitHub, we want to set up a GitHub commit message that starts a new pipeline. That's what a trigger could do. Other things that Supabase has that are just really helpful for new people, and I use it, it's just because it has so many things. It has auth, right? So that's the way that you can log in and do accounts. It has SSO, which is single sign on. It has a command line interface that lets you type into the terminal to do all these different commands. It also has some other things in here like edge functions. An edge is just the area on the network that's closest to the person, so that if you're doing something on their behalf and they're in Australia, it's going to do it at the edge closest to them. An example of this would be an OpenAI call. So if we were sending that GitHub user a customized message via a trigger, you would use an edge function. Other things that are in Postgres, I'm realizing this is kind of like a commercial for them, but it's just really helpful. And it's the thing that you will want to use for your vibe coding is, what else do they have? They have database, they have auth, they have CLI, they have edge functions. Honestly, that's all I use out of them. So that should be plenty. Oh, they have vectorization. So they have this thing called PG Vector. And what a vector is it takes a block of text. So if this was our example text, it's going to make a bunch of numbers and put them in an array, which are these square brackets. And that basically says this is how similar this word is in, I want to say it's like a 3D space. Basically, all I know and what all you need to know is it allows for similarity search. It allows you to vectorize or turn information, whether it's in a PDF or blocks of text, into this number format that makes it really easy for a machine to read, aka a computer, to do similarity search, augmented generation, which customizes the queries that you send through using an AI. So you would want to use Supabase. You would want to avoid the following pitfalls. So I told him, hey, look, like Tailwind is this awesome thing that lets you customize the look of your work. So if I have an image before Tailwind, if I had an image before Tailwind, I'd have to go into a separate CSS file. I'd have to do a custom image selector. Keep doing imager. Custom image thing. And then I'd write a bunch of this stuff in this one file saying, oh no, we want to have rounded edges. We want to have a shadow on all of them. And that's great. You can do it. But instead of doing that, Tailwind just lets me do what's called a class utility. So in the file where I'm putting the image, I would just do class name equals, and then I can just say rounded, right? So the catch though is if I'm telling them, hey, yeah, use Tailwind. Well, guess what? Tailwind just came out with Tailwind 4, and it is awful with LLMs. So you would want to actually know that you want to not use that one. So you'd go in after your vibe coded app is created, and you'd say, hey, never mind, I need to downgrade this. So you'd need to go into package.json, and you'd actually take in there, you'd take it, and let's just go and check it out. So I'd type in Tailwind, and you'd go to the main one. So Tailwind CSS. And instead, if you hover over it, it'll tell you what the most recent one is. So 4.0.15. No, you don't want that. You want something in the threes. Do 3.4.14. And then you want to make sure the other things that are in here, like the animate and whatever, don't have dependencies that are dependent on 4. Then you end up with really helpful AI. With 4, not helpful. With 3, helpful. Is that clear? Good. Another common one is this, like, just the patterns that are used, because this package.json thing, it's really awesome, but it's also really a big cause of a lot of issues. So what could happen is the LLM, again, LLM is a big brain. Let's call it just like OAI. This is our model. And whenever we yap at it to help with our code base, this is our code base, it's trained on stuff from October of 2024. And this has a package.json. This has a package.json which declares all these separate little mini apps like Tailwind, like Supabase. It declares all these separate things to be dependent on actually making the thing so that you can end up, with a dub or an iOS app. Like your actual output can't happen. Like it'll explode, and you'll end up in what's called dependency hell, where you're just trying to figure out what's going on. But it's because of this. It's because this model is trained on an old version. There's ways around it where you can say, hey, actually, we want to use Tailwind 4. Well, it's still not going to be as good. So that applies when your frameworks come out with new stuff. So I noticed this with the person yesterday, Aiden from the Trouble Free group, which you should check out if you're an aspiring business owner or current business owner using AI. Is he had Supabase, and he was trying to figure out how to authenticate users and manage sessions, but it kept giving him this issue, and it had to do with the fact that the framework he's using, which is Next.js, which I highly recommend for all noobs because it's front end, it's back end, it's everything. Well, Next.js, when they launched 15, when they went from 14 to 15, everything changed for this other thing, which was Supabase, right? So you just end up with like this nightmare inside of package.json, which has, again, all the dependencies and all these little like V1, V3, V4. And it's so confusing for people who don't actually read the documentation to know those things, because you'll get an error that's not very helpful. So what I would do is I'm trying to just kind of recognize the patterns and what issues come up the most by just talking to people who vibe code. And I think that's also a business opportunity. I think it's a 9-figure business opportunity is just literally fixing vibe code apps. Next up is auth. This one's tied in, but there's a lot of issues with this because getting, first of all, there's authentication, which authenticates the user to do something. And then there's authorization. And they're two separate things, but everyone just thinks of them as auth. So you could be authenticated to log into your account, but you may not be authorized to do something that an admin user has. So this is another pitfall. I'm not totally sure how you would build an agent around this to help because I do want to wrap all these pitfalls into a multi-agentic flow. We'll talk about that at the end of the video. The fourth one that I noticed with working with Vibe Code folks is this standalone stuff. So especially if you're using like Lovable, you're using Bolt, you're using V0, if you're using these really like junior got your training wheels stuff on, which is great. Like I'm happy people are using them. But if you use these, you're in their own like little ecosystem. And the second that you go out of that and then you go into Cursor, because you think you're going to like make more progress, so you want to go to the next level. The second that you go here, this again, like the configuration, the packages, the Tailwind files, there's all these things that just are going to be messed up. So it's like, oh, your next config, config.ts. That's the file that kind of dictates everything that's going on in your app when it comes to build time. And it's going to look really different if you come from, let's call it Lovable, because it had to run in their box. Whereas if you come out of there, then you need to change things. Maybe you need to add logging. Maybe they add, like, I've noticed that separate, I call them training wheel apps. So separate training wheel apps have different configurations. So then I find that next config, package.json, tailwind config, and ts config are just nightmare files that no one knows what they do because they don't know how to code. So I think if you, again, like created content around that, that's a really cool offer. So the last question that came in was around the best SEO setup. So I have a friend who's trying to do a play that requires SEO for lead gen on behalf of other businesses. And what I said was, okay, well, there's a couple things that you want to know. Well, SEO, you have on-page SEO, which is make sure you're using semantic HTML, which means that you should be using the HTML tag, obviously, but that's a bad example. You'd have using things like the aside tag. What's an aside tag? Exactly. No one uses it, but it makes Google happy because it's using semantic HTML. Another one would be, okay, make sure you're using your H1s only like once, really. Make sure you're using H2s. Make sure you're using P tags. Those are all obvious, but there's lesser known ones like this. So that'd be on page. And then you also need to worry, like, let's say that's like in bucket one. Bucket two would be using the accessibility things like screen reader. Who would think of that? Well, someone that's done SEO before. But there's all these little things, and Google themselves says that you get ranked on 200 plus different parameters, and then you end up with what's called a DA, a PA, and a DR. Domain rank, page authority, domain authority. So your entire domain gets a score, and it's like, oh, out of 100. So if you're like Time Magazine, you might be a 90, but probably not. You're probably like 80s, maybe 70s. But it's really high. Page authority could be a specific page within a website that gets its own independent score. Maybe it's like this really dope blog article that a gajillion people have read. They've stayed on the page for a really long time. They've been driven in from other places by a lot of different links. That's what a backlink is. And then the domain rank is just the rank of itself. So if I typed in like best restaurants near me, it's most likely that a chain's going to show up versus some new place that opened that's mom and pop because the chain has national authority. It has backlinks from other regional, statewide, nationwide accounts and websites. Maybe people have like written blogs about them. So they got all these things coming in that are working for them. So you'd have like a couple of these things. I do like off-page SEO, but the question is like, well, what stack would you use? Well, I would use Next. Even the biggest haters of the platform will say, hey, it's actually really good for this because it does this thing called SSR. It does ISR, and it does generating static params. What that means is this is server side rendering. So when you go to build the actual app, it's called at build time. So at build time, when it goes up to where you deploy it, so maybe you're using like Vercel or something. Let's just take a look at one. When you go to do this, it's going to actually make all the different blog articles. So like parkerrex.com, for instance, this is a good example. I have a blog on here. If I go to my deployments and then I click into one, you can see the logs for it. Logs are the traces. So build log. And you can see that all of these pages are created then and there. They're not created when someone then shows up to the website and then clicks on it. And then the browser needs to build this thing from scratch. No, it's built at build time. These are static. So they're there, they're not changing. You can see this blog /slug thing. The slug is a dynamic route, which means that everything in it could be different, but it's going to be under the blog slug route rather. And then you see each one of these is a blog post, and that should not have this little thing in here. That would get docked. Actually, that's another thing. But yeah, you'd see. Okay, cool. I have 38 different blog posts on here, and it's not going to show me all of them, but they're done then and there, and it's using the pre-rendered as static HTML using generate static params. So it's a function that you pass in when you go to do it. I can actually show you where it's done, just so you know. Let's open this up. Actually, let's use a hotkey. P. If I open up that, open up my site, and then let's just do a fuzzy search for generate static params. You can see at the page level of the blog. So if I look in the file tree, you can see I have blog. So it's parkerx /blog. And then slug. Slug is a dynamic route. You can see it with that pattern that Next uses. So that in each page below it, it's going to render that particular blog post. So then all I'm doing is I'm passing in the name of the post, the slug, which is that thing that you see in the search bar, and then the publish date, and that's it. And then you have this thing that's just saying, okay, generate these static parameters. A parameter is what you see in the search bar. It also does generate metadata. So this is another one because if you write a blog article and you want it to go live, you have things called metadata, which is the stuff around it. So if I sent you a text message or if I pasted this link into Twitter or Facebook or it's an iMessage, that little image that shows up, like at the preview, that text that's in it, like you can actually programmatically set that. So it's like I might look and see, I think it's called Open Graph, OG, Open Graph. Yeah. So there's this data that you basically put in there. So there's all these things, right? It's metadata, static params, but I would use some sort of checklist that I just went through and I would end up using Next for it. It's the best for SEO. Then you get happy because people are visiting your site. I should actually see what my stats are because I just started posting stuff. I think I have like 5 people going to my site. So SEO is a long game. You're going to see. Yeah. So like 11 visitors and then I stopped posting. It's like, oh, 2 visitors. So SEO is one of those things where it's like, quit worrying about it now, get into the habit of doing it. And then eventually over months, not weeks, will you start to see progress there. Auto respond logic. This is a piece of news I wanted to cover. So something I saw on Twitter was somebody was trying to do automated messaging for engaging with accounts. But if you just have someone like say something that's like super canned on every response, like you can go and you see their page and you check their replies and it's like you're actually degrading your personal brand by making yourself sound like a bot. So there's a way to do this. It's way smarter. And I won't rebuild it from scratch here, but I saw it in a pattern and I wanted to share it where if you have an automation setup, this would be the let's say like auto reply for and then, insert name of platform. You could do it with any of them. It's just different OAuth required. So if you did that, what you do is you'd authenticate, let's say YouTube, you'd authenticate with it. So you have, at Parker Rex or whatever. And then you'd go and you'd search the comments. So there might be a node for like comments. And then you'd go and you'd do what's called, you'd store it first. So then you'd have like a G sheet. And then after you do that, you have a classifier. Classifier is what it sounds like. It classifies things. And luckily, we're going to make this a round circle. This will just be OpenAI. But in there, you say, hey, like if question, return 1. And then you do the same thing. If suggestion, return 2. And then if comment, like or commentary or hot take or something, if some third thing, return 3. And then what that does is it allows you to then take whatever that number is. So it's going through, it's going to just basically categorize it or classify it. And then you do a router. So it splits it into 3 different sections or different like paths that you go down. So then you can choose, okay, cool. If it's this, then you're going to have an OAI that replies to the suggestion. It's like, hey, this is a suggestion. Can you write in this tonality? Here's examples of how I've done it. Here's examples of how of suggestions that I've gotten and then responses that I'd like to say. And what I would always do to really not sound like a bot is then you'd have an HITL or a human in the loop. This is when you get to see it. So it does the work. It like goes, it gets the thing, it reads it for you, and then it'll draft something. But then this is when you'd actually say, nope, like it's time for me to take a look. And this can be in the form of a text or an email. But then you'd say, okay, and then you do more automation around that where it's like, okay, it's good to go. And then it might go and actually do like the post. The same thing would go for this, right? So that's how you could do it. I wanted to show this clip. It's too good. The Primogen was on Lex Friedman.
Monitor kind of guy.
What? Really?
And I posted, let's see. Oh, it came out of this automation. This guy told him like, dude, you need some work on your prompts. But this is really worth watching.
He made some sort of tweet and one of the person's responses was, yeah, no one in this, like in 2025 or whatever, should be acquiring hard skills. You should rely on everything for the AI effectively. And it's just like, these are really damning pieces of advice for young people. Like young people are being told that you should never become an expert in anything. You should always offload. And the problem is that anyone worth any of their salt will tell you that AI, though can produce code, is going to get it wrong in a huge number of cases. And as the code becomes bigger or more complex or more input, it's going to just start kind of sloshing back and forth between bugs. And so if you don't have those hard skills and you're not ultimately the driver at the end of the day, like you're going to really find some hard times and your ability to progress will be directly bound to how good the LLMs are. Mm-hmm. So if you believe that the LLMs will be...
Boom. I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think it's... basically you can only get 80% of the way there, but that last 20% is going to be impossible. And that's not to mention the fact that most coding projects, you can get 99% of the way there, but the last percent is what matters. So just food for thought, fellas. Okay, I actually just bought 2 domains because I think this is a great example for an offer of fix my vote. I can't even say it with a straight face. Fixmyvibecodeapp.com. Come on down to fixmyvibecodeapp.com where we fix your vibe code app for you. I'm Parker Rex, and I'm here to fix your... Okay. Well, the point would be is you'd take this stuff that I'm learning by literally doing client work and getting paid to do these things, to like fix people's projects. I'm recognizing all the patterns in them. It will change. So you'd have to continuously at least take a client on a month to do it. But then that would subsidize the costs and make it worth either hiring someone to help you build this or just do it anyways because you're learning. You'd be paid to do the R&D. And then you turn around and the site would be following all this stuff I talked about earlier of SEO, where I would generate like all the different like pitfalls, right? And it'd be like, you'd look up, you'd use SEMrush or Ahrefs, These are SEO tools. And you look for the long tail keywords. So it'd be like how to vibe code. That's probably a really popular one. And then you just do that same thing, except with like enter fixed vibe code, connect Supabase, all these things that are super, super basic. Like I got asked, how do you connect your Supabase? I'm like, well, here's the docs. For some reason, people are allergic to docs, but I get it. Because if you get a doc and it's like, oh, just run npx create next app, because they need to like rescaffold their thing and do at latest. And then make sure you pass it the TypeScript flag. And then after that, make sure, so that's step one. That's really easy. And then next, you're going to do npx, shadcn UI init. And then you're good. Well, guess what? No one knows what npx means. And then you go off on that rabbit hole and you're like, what is Node? And then you're like, oh my gosh. And if you can get past that, then it's like, what's a package? And then maybe you find out about PNPM because you're on Reddit and someone says, use that. And then you're looking for that. And then you're like, well, wait, what's bun? And then you quit. So I think making these things really easy, like the most basic, like how NPX works. Like this would just be a website that has a gajillion articles, and most likely people wouldn't want to do it themselves. So you'd have the article, you'd have a blog page, right? And then you'd take the HubSpot templates, which are Google approved, and you'd say, okay, cool. We're going to have, maybe it's its own channel, but probably not. But you'd have like the blog article, and then you'd have a sidecar, which is like, just do it for me. And then that'd be the offer. So that brings in the last thing that I wanted to actually plan on this video before we wrap, which is how would you build this to be standalone so that I'm not actually doing anything? And it would be a couple of different scenarios. It would be N8N. It'd be a couple scenarios. So when I say scenario, like this is a scenario, right? Like one scenario. It'd be a couple of these. And then it'd be an MCP cluster. What does that mean? We'll explain in a sec. HITL means it's the stop sign. That means, hey, wait, I need to look at this before it goes live. And the better that your system is, the quicker that you remove that, right? But at first you need it because you don't want this thing to be on autopilot. You don't want to be a bot. So an MCP cluster is essentially a bunch of, like, an MCP is the thing that lets you connect AI to other apps. So the way that it works now, if you're not familiar, is like you have, let's say, Premiere Pro, a video editing app, and they're not going to get AI for like 15 years, right? And then you have Claude, desktop app. What an MCP does is it connects these two in its simplest form. It lets you say, hey, look, I want to yap at this thing. And then it'll go do things in there. So instead of being Premiere Pro, where it's like 8 gajillion different menus, like menu 1, 2, 3, 4, you actually have these commands in here. So it'd be like clip, cut, create, sequence. You'd have a bunch of these different tools that are really well defined that have a tool to function. But then when you're talking, the AI can determine what tool to pull. So I'd say, hey, I just added a sequence. There's a 1-minute video in it. I want you to run, actually, I really want this. No one's built it yet, but run the auto text edit tool. What that does is it takes your video that has audio in it and it finds areas where it's flat, where there's no audio, and it just clips them, right? So right now I have to go in here, and it's really helpful, right? That's one step in the right direction, where I can go in and I can click that button and it does it. There's another one that's called, I just always call it the remover, which finds areas with filler words, and it goes and it does those. But what would be awfully nice is if you had an MCP that had the remove tool. So when you open up the Claude desktop app, or in your case, you could run your own server that doesn't require you to have cursor, that doesn't require you to have anything. It's its own dedicated server that sits between the two and does the thing. You could build your own interface around it. So you could just say, hey, new video is uploaded, go do your thing on it. If you have really basic editing, you could actually do this. And that's what I plan to do. Because when I go and I edit, all that I'm doing is I just make sure that the video is pretty good. Like, I try not to say I try to keep it tight, and then all I do is I list out the steps. So when I do this, I create a sequence. I do command plus I import. I add most recent clip to sequence. So these are the steps, which are tools, because these are all deterministic. There's nothing artsy in here yet. After I do that, I switch to text-based editing. After that, I remove filler words. After that, I add template adjustment layer. And there's nothing in there that I'm doing that these tools can't do, which is just wild. I'm freaking out because I haven't thought of this one. And then I export with preset. That's literally it. That thing goes off. It hits Auphonic. Auphonic does a whisper transcription. It does the audio editing, so it sounds much crispier. It posts it to YouTube. It has the transcript. It has all these things. So that would be an example of an MCP, but you wouldn't do it in here. You could literally have it just do all this on its own little hosted server. So when it comes to this, if you had Fix My Vibe Code app, well, if you knew all the pitfalls and you knew the stack, you'd have a really strict qualifier, which is the client type. So your ICP, or your ideal customer profile, the person that you could sell to that would make the most sense, would be a Next 15 user. It would be someone that you could pick the training wheel app of choice. So you'd say they just completed their build with Lovable. They're using Shad CN. They're using TypeScript. They're using Supabase. And they're using Tailwind. You'd learn a little bit more about the project, and this would end up being a funnel where, let's do green is the sales. So in your funnel, you have a form. You can either ask them questions, or you can have them click a tick box, and this would be even sicker. Upload your code base and we'll fix it for you. We promise we're not going to take it. Something like that. When they upload it, we could run a check, or another agent that could just scan the thing. So you could do a repo pack. I think it's called Repo Mix now. What Repo Mix does is it would take this big old code base and it flattens it. Let's just run it just to show you. So let's take the Parker Rec site. I'm going to do Repo Mix tokens, exclude that. Let's do... Actually, I don't want the tokens. Let's look at what Repo Mix... Packer code base, formerly Repo Pack. What it does is it takes every file that you want and then smushes it. You can do this without installation. I want to exclude some certain files. Ignore these. Yeah, let's do this. And then, even better, I could do a remote one if they gave their URL and it was open. But I could do this, and then for here, I would ignore node modules. And next. Cool. It just flattened the whole thing, and now it's in a file in the directory. You take this, And this is 364,000 tokens. If you don't have this extension, get it. It's the bottom right. It's like right below right here. Boom. But you could take this and then you could run a Gemini against it. So I could say, I could do a call to Gemini. And I'm going to just do this off the dome real quick. Let's see if it works. Would flash thinking be good for this? Gemini is just really good with large context. So 360 something tokens is a Gemini. Analyze the following code base and give me the stack. Obviously check the package.json, but it's also important to understand how it plays a role throughout the code base so I can understand the dependency structure. Return a mermaid.js. Return an ASCII swim lane diagram explaining the IO, data ingress and egress, and core flows. So what this is doing in this fixmyvibecodeapp.com is it's going and it's doing an audit on it. And it's going to take this and it's going to freeze because it's a lot. But it's going to take this and it's going to give you, I know what it is. It's because I have Grammarly. Grammarly is helpful, but also pain in the butt. Of course. Wait. Let's refresh. No, I wanted that. How about T3 chat? Let's try this. We're going to go here. Can I upload a file? Oh man, it pasted. Look at it go. Good for you, Theo. If you haven't checked out T3 app, our T3 chat is actually really fire. Okay. So what I do is, hopefully it'll work. Come on. Ugh. This is painful. Forget it. You'd get an output and you'd take that output. You'd analyze and classify it like we did with the 1, 2, 3. And you could probably do that. So you'd go to Gemini. And then you'd say, if it has these qualifications, then send it to either send it a proposal because we want to be loosey-goosey and try to get the business, or we could say find the pitfalls, because this would be a better qualifier for us. And then we could define those. So we could define it. Is it the cookie thing? Is it the config? And you'd have examples of good files versus bad files. But this would be like a fully automated funnel, basically, for fixing them. So go to the vibecodefix.com and get your VibeCodeX app fixed today. Oh, man. That was fun. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you want to hang out sometime, join Trouble Free. It's $39 a month to basically be in this research lab club thing. It's going to be a brand. It's not just a school. I don't want to even be on school, to be honest. I feel like a scumbag being on that platform, only because there's just other stuff on there that I feel like isn't the same. But for now, it's good. And you should join because we have Saturday calls. I'm actually going to do a Sunday call right after this. And if you have any questions, that's even more important. If you have questions, drop them below so we can get some airtime for your ideas. If you hate me, also write that because it helps me out. See you in the next one, which is tomorrow. Bye-bye.